My name is Lily. I had just turned 16 that afternoon, and I never imagined the most memorable birthday gift I'd get would be getting kicked out of my own home by my own mother. "Giving you a sneak peek, Grandpa?" I whispered into the phone, live streaming via FaceTime with my grandfather Curtis, who was in Florida. I walked slowly toward my bedroom door, heart full of hope. He had promised to send me a new set of gouache paints from my favorite craft store, the expensive kind I'd been eyeing for months. I had pictured the moment I'd open the door and see the brown paper-wrapped box, neatly placed on my old easel, next to my unfinished sketches. I opened the door. No easel. No paints. Not a single trace of me. Instead, a pristine white crib stood in the middle of the room, sunlight cutting across it through the blinds. The walls were now painted in pastel tones, decorated with tiny elephants floating on balloons. Everything that belonged to me. Hand-drawn posters, art prints, my favorite literary quotes taped to the wall, was gone without a trace. I froze. This room used to be the only place where I could truly be myself. Now it looked like I had never existed. I called out softly, "Mom?" Then louder, "Dad?" Their voices drifted up from downstairs, casual, chatting from the kitchen. I still had the FaceTime call going. Grandpa was seeing all of it live. I walked down the stairs like my legs were made of lead. The kitchen door was slightly ajar. I heard my mom, Amelia, talking calmly to my dad, Greg, whose voice sounded tired and worn, like someone who had long given up trying to have a say. "She'll understand, Greg, sooner or later. We should have waited until she got home." What for? So she could throw one of her usual tantrums? I pushed the door open. What the hell happened to my room? Mom turned, adjusting the lapel of her ash-gray blazer, her face completely unreadable. "We need to talk, Lily. There have been some small changes." "You mean turning my room into a nursery without telling me?" I gripped the phone tighter. "I've lived there for 16 years. Dad avoided eye contact, pretending to be deeply focused on his lukewarm coffee. Mom said, "Your sister Brooke is pregnant and needs a quiet space to rest." Your room made the most sense. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. "And what about me? Where am I supposed to sleep? The garage?" Mom crossed her arms, expression ice cold. "You'll be staying with Aunt Lorraine. Temporarily, until we figure things out." "Temporarily?" I repeated, my throat tightening. "I'm a family member, not a piece of furniture you move around at convenience." "Lily," Mom cut in. "It's time you stopped acting like a child. You're 16. You're not the center of the universe anymore. Brooke is about to become a mother. You should learn to support, not disrupt." "And what about what I need?" I snapped. "Nobody's asking how I feel. Nobody's standing up for me." Mom glanced at Dad. He kept staring at the floor, like if he did it long enough this would all disappear. Powerless. Cowardly. "Lorraine will pick you up tonight," Mom said, as if announcing a weather update. "I've already packed a few of your essentials." I looked at the two people in front of me. The man who taught me to ride a bike. The woman who once held me through a fever. Now they felt like strangers, casually rearranging my life like grocery items. "Happy birthday to me," I said, voice hollow. "Don't be dramatic," Mom sighed. "You'll have a better space, closer to school. And Lorraine's very accommodating." I turned and walked away. "You're right, Mom. This isn't a tragedy. But at least now I know exactly where I stand in this house." I ended the FaceTime call with Grandpa as I headed upstairs, but not before whispering, "Did you see all that?" His voice came through instantly, firm and clear. "Every word, Lily, every single word." I opened the door to what used to be my room, now the nursery, and stared at the white crib. The floating elephants on the walls seemed to mock me. I placed my hand on the crib rail and silently made a promise. If they think I'll disappear that easily, they have no idea who I really am. The old red suitcase rattled across the cold ceramic tiles as I dragged it down the steps. Each bump felt like a hammer striking the fragile thing we once called family. No one came to see me off. Mom locked herself in her upstairs office, and Dad stayed at the dining table, pretending to read a newspaper he never even flipped open. I hadn't been waiting on the porch for more than a minute when a silver SUV pulled up. Aunt Lorraine stepped out of the driver's seat, wrapped in a brown scarf, her face still carrying traces of sleep, even though it was nearly 6 p.m. She didn't ask anything. She just looked at me, then opened the trunk. On the way to her house, I got a single message. From Mom. Lily. I hope you'll use this time to reflect on your attitude. It's time you learn not to turn everything into drama. Don't try, I didn't respond. I knew exactly how I felt, and it wasn't being dramatic. It was betrayal wrapped in the sugary tone of family duty. It was being discarded like an old coat that no longer fit. It was a nameless ache when someone chooses another's comfort over protecting their own child. Aunt Lorraine lived in a quiet suburb about a 40-minute drive from home, where the white picket fences were so perfectly painted that not a single chip dared show. Her house smelled like vanilla and aged pine wood, and the air felt oddly still, like time had frozen between past and present. That night, I sat on the bare guest bed, staring up at the ceiling. Aunt Lorraine had left a cup of hot tea and a few butter cookies on the desk, then quietly went downstairs. She said nothing. I knew she didn't want me to feel interrogated. But somehow, that silence made the lump in my throat harder to swallow. I checked my phone. No messages from Dad. No missed calls. Not a single word, asking if I'd arrived safely. Nothing. I considered FaceTiming Grandpa Curtis like I usually did, but my finger hovered over the button. Maybe I didn't want him to see me like this. Maybe I was afraid he'd see the collapse in my eyes I was trying so hard to hide. The next morning, while Aunt Lorraine was making pancakes, I got a text from an unknown number. No name saved. Still playing the victim? Brooke's about to be a mom. She needs peace, not your teenage breakdowns. Stop making Mom even more disappointed. I knew it was from Brooke. Her tone was unmistakable. That signature mix of fake concern and subtle contempt. I stared at the message for a long time. Said nothing. But my stomach twisted like someone had grabbed it and squeezed. Aunt Lorraine sat down across from me, placing a plate of pancakes in front of me. You don't have to eat if you don't want to, she said softly. I looked at her. They say I'm selfish, that I ruin everything, that I only care about myself. She nodded, neither denying nor looking surprised. Adults often call a child's pain overreacting, because admitting their own mistakes is much harder. I gripped the fork in my hand, but Dad didn't say anything, not a word. He sat right next to Mom, looked at me like he didn't even know who I was. "Knows," she replied. He just didn't have the courage to speak up. Part of me wanted to cry, another part just felt cold. That afternoon, while helping Aunt Lorraine sort through old paintings in the storage room, I found a small box with my name scribbled on it in black marker. I opened it. Inside was a stack of drawings from when I was in 7th grade. Drawings Mom had thrown away during a cleaning spree, claiming they were worthless. Aunt Lorraine had saved them. I was stunned. I figured someday you'd want to remember what made you happy, she said. That night, I pulled out my sketch pad and sat by the window to draw. For the first time in months, my hand didn't tremble holding the pencil. I was no longer the girl who believed everything would be okay if I just tried hard enough. I knew better now. Family love without fairness and respect is just a trap wrapped in a pretty bow. And I wasn't going to let anyone slap the label selfish onto my pain again. No one has the right to define my worth, especially those who erased my existence just to make room for a crib and a child not yet born. I glanced at the warm light glowing from the room across the hall. Aunt Lorraine was reading, quiet, unforced, uncontrolling. I sat on the bedroom windowsill, legs draped over an old curtain, pencil in hand, sketching a scene I once saw from Grandma's back porch. The place where I painted my first picture ever, using watercolor mixed with rainwater. My phone buzzed, a message from a number I knew too well. Brooke, are you really okay with ruining a beautiful moment just because of your ego? Do you know Mom cried because of you? I let out a dry chuckle. Cry? My mother only cried when the property taxes went up, or when groceries weren't arranged the way she liked in the pantry. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out the old sketchbook Aunt Lorraine had given me. On the third page, I stopped. A charcoal drawing of me, standing alone on an empty stage with a single spotlight shining from behind, casting a shadow twice my size. I drew that when I was 10. You remember the school art show in 5th grade? Aunt Lorraine asked suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of warm milk, one for her, one for me. Of course I remember, I said, voice scratchy. Mom scheduled a client dinner that night, and Dad promised he'd come after, but he fell asleep in the car. And you brought 6 paintings, she added. One of them was Grandpa Curtis's portrait. He still has it framed in the living room. I smiled faintly. Mom told me I shouldn't get my hopes up for things that don't make money. She sat beside me, placing the mug in my hand. You didn't draw for 2 years after that, I noticed. So did Grandpa. I looked down at the sketch. Those shaky, early lines packed with emotion. Why couldn't they see how much it meant to me? Because they didn't want to see it, Lily, she said gently. Seeing it means caring. Caring means changing. And change means admitting fault. Not everyone's brave enough to do that. I wrapped my hands around the mug. Its warmth eased something in my chest. I think Mom truly believes I'm selfish. Maybe, Aunt Lorraine said. But sometimes, people slap the label selfish on anyone who dares to stop being someone else's background character. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. A video from Brooke. I pressed play. It was a short clip from last night's dinner. Brooke sitting at the center of a candlelit table, guests raising their glasses to toast her baby. My mother's voice rang out, full of theatrical emotion. We hope this baby brings unity, love, and selflessness. Everyone clapped. Brooke smiled at the camera and said, May our child never be the reason a bedroom tears a family apart. I stopped the video. Not because it was offensive, but because it was empty. A performance. Like always. I handed the phone to Aunt Lorraine. She shook her head. They needed a villain to finish their little story, and you were the easiest target. I suddenly remembered that old sketch, the girl standing at the edge of the frame, forgotten by the stage lights. I picked up my pencil and added a new stroke, a second spotlight. Coming in from a different angle, illuminating the parts the first one missed. Aunt Lorraine watched me draw, didn't ask anything. After a while she stood, and said softly, I've got a surprise for you tomorrow. It's small, but it might remind you who you used to be. I nodded. My chest still felt hollow, but my pencil strokes were steadier now. That night, I didn't fall asleep right away. I reopened an old message from Grandpa Curtis. I'll be there Friday night. Make sure you open the door. And bring your old drawing. There's something I want to show you. Something shifted inside me. Like a tiny part of my old life was returning. But this time, with the right people. For the right reasons. I texted back. Bring black coffee, okay? And if you still have a print of my first drawing, you know, the one I made of you, in that old armchair? His reply came instantly. Framed since 2015. Still hanging in the living room. Always made me proud. I turned off the light and laid my phone on the pillow beside me. If they didn't want to remember who I was, then I'd be the one to remind them. Not through rage, but with the very thing they once dismissed. Art. And truth. Friday afternoon, Just as I was about to take my sketch out to the back porch to wait for Grandpa Curtis, my phone buzzed again. It was from Mom. "We're having a family dinner this Sunday. Everyone will be there to celebrate Brooke's official announcement. There's no reason for you to be absent. We're still a family, Lily." No, I'm sorry, no concern. Just a command, disguised as still a family. I didn't want to go, but I knew that if I refused, Mom would twist the story into another act. That I was making a scene, isolating myself, being selfish. I typed a short reply. "I'll be there." Grandpa Curtis arrived later than usual. His flight from Tampa had been delayed. When he finally walked into Aunt Lorraine's house at 9 p.m., his knit sweater still smelled faintly of airports and bad coffee. But his eyes were as clear as ever, and in his hand was that worn leather folder he never left behind. "You're caught in your mother's game," he said the moment he sat down at the table, "and this game isn't just about Brooke or that crib. It's a lot bigger." I sat silently, watching him open the folder. Inside were copies of documents from the board of Curtis Simons Freight Co., the company he co-founded with a friend back in the 80s. It had thrived for decades, and recently, my mother, Amelia, was invited onto the board as a financial overseer, a role that had once been symbolic. Until a few weeks ago. "She's been pressuring me to transfer my voting power to Brooke," he said, voice heavy. "She says it's to secure the family legacy by merging Brooke and Richard's company with ours." I stared at him. "You mean they're trying to merge? And Brooke's baby is the final card?" He nodded. "A picture-perfect next generation, ready to inherit. That's how she plans to sway the old school board members." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Me, the girl who once stayed up all night building Grandpa's PowerPoint deck for a trade conference in 9th grade, the one he called his little partner, was now being pushed aside for a pregnancy bump. "She needs you out of the public image," he continued. "You don't fit the narrative she's selling." I clenched my fists. "So, this family dinner is a soft launch for the merger? And a final test?" he said firmly. "To see if you're still part of this family. Or just a variable to be removed." I sat in silence for a long moment. "Will you go with me?" "Not as your grandfather," he said, his eyes sharp with the edge of his former CEO self. "But as a founding shareholder." On Sunday night, our family's estate glowed like a Christmas gala. Guests' cars lined both sides of the street. I didn't enter through the front like a reluctant invitee. I walked with Grandpa Curtis through the side door, just like he taught me. Never enter center stage when you don't control the script. Mom appeared in a square-neck blue dress, smile pasted on like makeup. She froze for a fraction of a second when she saw Grandpa standing beside me. "Dad," she nodded, "I didn't know you were coming." "I didn't know I was being replaced by a pregnancy-based merger strategy," he replied flatly. Brooke emerged from the dining room, her baby bump now obvious, clinging to Richard. The man who always spoke like he was pitching to investors. "Lily," she smiled, eyes scanning me like I was a potential liability. "I'm glad you came. You look different." I didn't reply, my eyes locked on a newly framed digital portrait in the hallway, a family picture. I wasn't in it. Mom cleared her throat. "Let's begin dinner. Brooke and Richard have something to share. Our family is about to enter a new era." Grandpa leaned in and whispered to me. "When they raise their glasses, stand up. Read the paragraph I marked in the merger draft. Then ask them, does this family still have room for truth?" I nodded, voice barely audible. "They're not ready." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "No? But you are." Dinner was staged like a ceremony. Pristine white tablecloths, flickering upscale candles, and glasses filled with non-alcoholic champagne. As if to ease the conscience of wealthy people pretending to be virtuous. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to a distant aunt wearing overpowering perfume and a frozen smile. My mother moved like a theater director, controlling every gesture, every angle. Everything was too perfect, too polished. Which only confirmed something was deeply wrong beneath the surface. When I excused myself to get more water, she barely glanced up before nodding, too busy charming some elderly investor from Chicago. I didn't head to the kitchen. Instead, I slipped into the hallway that led to the library. The room my father once called the only place left to breathe in this house. The library door was ajar. As I approached, I heard my mother's voice, just loud enough to chill my spine. "Everything's going according to plan. You just need to keep playing your role, Brooke." "You mean as a baby-making machine?" Brooke's voice was so dry I barely recognized it. "Don't talk like that, you're creating a symbol. A model for the company's future. A child born from the union of two legacy families. They won't dare block the merger. But what if Grandpa finds out? He won't forgive this." "He won't have a choice," Mom replied coldly. "He's sentimental, soft. Especially when it comes to the first great-grandchild. Don't forget what he's said about legacy and passing the company on." A long pause. I took half a step closer. My hand clenched the doorframe. "What about Lily?" Brooke asked, her voice lower. "She stays out of sight for now. She's not marketable. Too emotional. That so-called artistic passion will only drag us down." "But what if she finds out?" Mom let out a quiet, calculated laugh. "She will. And she'll get angry. Like always. But who's going to believe a girl who got kicked out of her own house for emotional instability? Everyone already saw her meltdown at the birthday dinner. The script's already written. She ruined her own image a long time ago." I don't remember how I pulled myself away from that door. I just remember standing in the dim hallway, chest heaving, hands shaking as the truth sank in. I wasn't just being pushed aside, they were using me to justify a plan. I couldn't stay silent. When I returned to the dining room, the table had erupted in laughter over some story Richard was telling. Mom caught my eye, surprised to see me back so soon. But she quickly smiled again, pretending everything was under control. I didn't wait for the champagne toast. I pulled my chair back, stood up straight, and said clearly, "Brooke, I have something to ask you. But actually, I want everyone here to hear it." Silence. The sound of silverware froze against porcelain. I walked toward the head of the table, facing Mom. "You're using Brooke's baby to manipulate Grandpa. To push through a merger you've been planning behind everyone's back. And you're cutting me out of everything, even this family." A beat of silence, then laughter from my mother. "Lily," she said gently, like soothing a rebellious child. "You're tired. This isn't the time for theatrics." "It's not theatrics," I shot back. "It's what you told Brooke. In the library. 10 minutes ago." I looked at Brooke. Her eyes flickered. Richard turned to my mother, visibly thrown. Grandpa Curtis set his glass down. "Is that true, Amelia?" Mom kept smiling, but this time, I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. "Dad, everything I've done was to protect the company's future. I only used an unborn child," he cut in, sharp. "And discarded your own daughter like a liability?" I looked at her one last time. "You've always told me I'm too emotional. But maybe the real mistake in this room is someone forgetting that emotion is the only thing that keeps a family real." Then I turned and walked away from the dinner table. The sound of my mother's high heels echoed behind me like a forced melody. Tense, threatening, deliberate. I hadn't made it 10 steps from the dinner table before her voice cut through the air. "Lily, stop." I didn't turn around. But her voice drew closer, cold, like steel against my throat. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but if you believe a few emotional outbursts can ruin a plan that took 2 years to build, Exactly. A deep, firm male voice interrupted without hesitation. I spun around. There stood Grandpa Curtis, still in his charcoal gray suit and that old tie I'd sketched dozens of times. He wasn't alone. Aunt Lorraine stepped in beside him, holding her familiar brown leather case. Around the table, relatives, guests, and business partners fell completely silent. Only my mother lost composure. Her face twitched, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape. But there was none. "Dinner's still in progress, Dad," my mother said, forcing her voice into something polite. "I don't think this is the right moment to discuss business." "I strongly disagree," Grandpa replied, striding toward the table like it was his stage. "I've come to understand that tonight's gathering isn't just about celebrating my granddaughter's pregnancy, but about launching a hidden merger plan, using the unborn child as a pawn to sway shareholders." A murmur rippled down the table, mostly from Richard's side. "And if what I've heard is accurate," he continued, "then my daughter, Amelia, has not only orchestrated this narrative, but has also lobbied the board to shift voting power ahead of schedule." "You have no proof," Mom retorted. "This is all the word of a hurt child who refuses to grow up." "Lily isn't speaking alone," Grandpa said, turning to Aunt Lorraine. She stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table with a thud that made the silverware tremble. "These are copies of emails between Amelia and Richard's firm, proposing a strategic family merger. There are also recorded calls with partners, where she stated, and I quote, 'The baby will force them to trust us.'" I clearly heard a silver spoon drop onto a porcelain plate. No more laughter. No more small talk. Just silence. Mom held onto her composure like a lifeline. She slowly pulled her napkin from her lap and stood. "Lily," she said, turning to me, "I've forgiven a lot from you. But dragging your grandfather into your little rebellion? That's the last straw." I met her gaze. "No, Mom, you crossed the line. Not because I don't understand, but because you thought I'd never have the courage to speak." My voice was steady. For the first time in a year I wasn't trembling. "You always said I was too sensitive, too emotional, too messy. But the truth is, you've always feared that I'd feel things you didn't want anyone to see. That everything you do isn't about legacy, it's about control." Brooke slowly stood, holding her belly. Her face had lost all color. Richard tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Is it true?" she asked, voice hoarse, eyes locked on Mom. "Am I just a tool in your plan?" "You're overwhelmed, Brooke," Mom said quickly. "Everything I've done is for you, for the baby, for this family." "No," Grandpa cut her off. "It was for power, and you just lost it." He pulled a sealed envelope from his coat. "I'm temporarily suspending Amelia Whitman from the board of Curtis Simons Freight Co., pending an internal investigation into manipulation and exploitation of family interests for personal gain." My mother stepped back, no words, no allies. I looked around. Richard lowered his head. Brooke turned toward me, her eyes red, but finally seeing clearly. Aunt Lorraine gave me a slight nod, and Grandpa placed his hand firmly on my shoulder. I was no longer the one pushed aside, I was the one standing in the center between shadow and light. Between lies and the truth just spoken aloud. 3 days after that fateful dinner, a voicemail from Richard landed in my inbox. His voice was tight, urgent, and clipped. "Lily, we need to talk. There are documents your mother is trying to bury. Meet me at the office at 4. Come alone." I hesitated. I should have told Grandpa or Aunt Lorraine, but my gut whispered, if there's something worth knowing before Mom erases it all, it's now. I grabbed my coat, shoved my phone into my pocket, and walked out without leaving a note. Richard's office sat on the 17th floor of a cold, glass high-rise, just as icy as the way he always looked at me when he called me the uncontrollable problem child. I stepped into the elevator, feeling like I was drifting through steel. The doors opened. It wasn't Richard waiting. It was my mother. Amelia Whitman, flawlessly made-up face, sharp eyeliner, expensive tailored suit clinging to her body like armor, stood calmly in the silent room. "You came faster than I expected," she said, voice dripping with sweetness that instantly set off every alarm. I stepped back, ready to leave. But she entered the elevator and hit the emergency stop button. The doors slammed shut. The elevator jolted, then stilled between floors. "Just listen. One time. No interruptions." I crossed my arms. "You've got 1 minute. This could be very simple if you cooperate," she said, pulling a thick envelope from her bag. "It's an acceptance letter from a private art school in Switzerland. Very discreet, very far. Sign here and you'll have a fresh start. No pressure, no conflict." I scoffed. "Only, it's not an acceptance letter, is it?" She narrowed her eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about." I stepped forward, snatched the folder, and flipped through. The first page was from an arts academy. But further down, I spotted it. A familiar phrase: voluntary admission to Silver Ridge Mental Health Center. Ice ran down my spine. "You want to institutionalize me?" "Not institutionalize, Lily," she cooed. "Just stabilize. You need time to reflect. You're spiraling." "And if I say no?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she opened her tablet and played a video. I saw myself. At dinner. Standing, yelling, gesturing wildly. But the words I'd actually said were gone. The footage had been edited, chopped until I looked like a hysterical wreck. The part where I exposed the merger plan? Erased completely. "If you don't sign," she said, her voice now sharp, "this video will circulate. College admissions, scholarships, media, social platforms. Who's going to believe you after this?" I clenched my fists. "It's fake." "Any proof?" she smiled. "Who will they trust? A successful mother? Or a girl flagged for behavioral issues since age 12? Suddenly, the elevator doors opened. Grandpa Curtis stood there. Next to him was Aunt Lorraine. Both breathless, as if they'd just sprinted from the parking garage. He held out a hand. "Lily, don't sign anything." My mother's face changed instantly. "Dad, this is private. Between me and my daughter." "I don't think so," Grandpa said, stepping inside and taking the tablet from her. "This is the edited video, isn't it?" "I'm trying to help her," she snapped. "She's self-destructing, she's—" "No," he interrupted. "You're destroying her by pathologizing dissent, by turning mental health forums into weapons." Aunt Lorraine took the file from my hands, flipping to the last page. "This isn't a voluntary admission. It's a pre-prepared commitment order. You only needed her signature to legally declare Lily mentally unstable under state law." I shook, not from fear, but fury. "Way?" I asked. "You were really willing to do all this, just to get me out of the way?" She said nothing. But her eyes, no longer masked. Only arrogance and pride remained. "Fine," I said. "If you think that video can beat the truth, go ahead, release it." I pulled out my phone and opened my voice recording app. "But remember this. There are 4 people in this elevator. And you can't control all of them." Grandpa's voice came low, steady, and full of the storm that was coming. "Game over, Amelia." She didn't speak again. But for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. And I knew. If she wanted to cast me as the darkness, then I would become the light that forced every shadow to reveal itself. The office door burst open again before any of us could react. Brooke stepped in, sweat on her brow, clutching her phone like it contained something that could set the whole building ablaze. "You lied, Mom," she panted, voice sharp with fury. And I have proof. No one said a word. Not even Mom. She instinctively stepped back, a flicker of fear passing across her face. Brooke opened her voice recorder app, selected a file, and hit play. Mom's voice rang out, loud and clear through the speaker. Cold, calculated, undeniable. Cut the part where Lily talks about the merger, add clips of her screaming. People just need to see a girl out of control. And that old man Curtis? Corner him emotionally. Once Brooke announces the pregnancy during dinner, he'll go soft. Lily's not the problem. She's the leftover in the equation. Someone like her can't represent the company. Each sentence was a slap in the face. But not to me. To her. Grandpa Curtis gripped the edge of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. No one had ever seen him like that. Even Aunt Lorraine stood frozen. Brooke's eyes locked onto Mom's. I heard everything. Every single word. You didn't just use me. You used my child. You don't love this baby. You just need it as a bargaining chip. Mom's voice trembled. You don't understand the bigger picture. No. Grandpa cut in. Voice shaking but razor sharp. Amelia, it's you who doesn't understand. Family is not strategy. Not a tool. And certainly not a weapon to destroy each other. From his coat, he pulled out a hard copy of the Curtis Simons board charter. I had never seen him bring that anywhere. That meant one thing. He came prepared. Lily, he said, turning to me. Give me the commitment form your mother tried to make you sign. I handed it to him, my hands still trembling. He read it over quickly. Then tore it in half right in the middle of the room. The pieces fluttered to the floor like a verdict. Amelia Whitman, he said, looking straight at my mother. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all positions at Curtis Simons Freight Co. The board will convene within 48 hours to vote on permanent removal. In the meantime, I'm transferring interim leadership to Callista Simons and your daughters, Lily Whitman and Brooke Sanders. Mom went pale. Her face drained, but her eyes still rigid, still refusing to break. You think you've won, she hissed. That company is my blood. I gave my whole life to keeping it alive. No one's denying that. Aunt Lorraine spoke up, her voice sharp as glass for the first time. But you were wrong to believe that, gave you the right to decide who gets to exist in this so-called family business. Richard leaned silently against the wall, saying nothing. I saw him take a half-step toward Brooke, but she backed away. You knew, she said, her voice low. And you stayed silent. From now on, I don't need you either. No one had to scream, no one had to call security. The real power was in the silence, when everyone finally realized what they'd lost. And that it could never be reclaimed. I walked over to Brooke. We looked at each other for just a second, but I saw it. Regret, yes. But gratitude too. She whispered. You were right. You were the only one who didn't look away. I smiled faintly. That's because I was the only one who never needed her pride to survive. Grandpa turned to me. Do you want to say anything, Lily? I nodded. I don't need an apology. But if this is the moment we're rebuilding the company, I have one condition. All eyes turned to me. I want to create a nonprofit division, one dedicated to helping teens pushed aside by their own families. Funded by a percentage of the company's profits. Aunt Lorraine smiled. Brooke nodded. Grandpa didn't say anything. He just placed a firm hand on my shoulder. The world's beginning to change, Lily, and you just opened the first door. I looked at Mom one last time. She turned away, eyes distant. Like someone who had just lost the only home they ever built. But this time, I didn't feel pain. Only relief, like I had finally taken off an invisible armor that had weighed on my heart for years. I arrived in Berkeley on a crisp autumn morning. Sunlight soft enough to ease the air, yet still laced with the lingering chill of old wounds. The city greeted me with the scent of wood, the hush of bicycle tires gliding over sidewalks, and rows of moss-covered buildings that looked like they had seen thousands of broken beginnings stitched into something new. My dorm room was small, but full of light. I taped my first drawing to the wall. A view from Aunt Lorraine's window, the one I had sketched after that night she placed a warm mug of milk on my table and said, "You're not selfish, sweetheart. You've just spent too long being quiet." I wasn't quiet anymore. My first class was about contemporary art and the role of personal memory in creation. Professor Daniels gave us this assignment: draw a space that once imprisoned you. Then transform it into somewhere you'd want to return to. I knew exactly what I would draw. For the next 3 weeks, I disappeared into pastel dust, acrylic paint, and the crisp scent of new paper. Nobody in the class asked too many questions, but I could tell they felt something private unraveling across every layer of color. I painted the old room, not the pastel nursery my mother had staged with white cribs and wall decals, but the room as I remembered it. The chipped paint, the torn corners of movie posters I had retaped. I let light stream through the curtains, casting a glow on the corner where I once kept the box of colored pencils Grandpa Curtis sent me. But unlike the real version, in this painting, I left an easel behind, and on that easel, a sketch of myself. Hair messy, eyes red, but clutching a paintbrush like it was armor. I titled the piece, "Return." At the semester showcase, Professor Daniels chose my work for the center wall. I stood in the corner, avoiding cameras, but watched as people paused longer in front of my painting. A middle-aged woman cried. A freshman whispered to her friend, "It feels so real, so painful, but warm too." That night, Brooke texted me, "I saw a photo of your painting on the school page. It hit deeper than any article I've read. Thank you for not becoming a copy of Mom." I read her message in silence. For the first time in a long while, her name didn't bring tension. The following week, I received a letter from Grandpa Curtis. Inside was a business magazine with a headline: Curtis Simons Restructures. Hands reins to new generation. Below was a photo of Aunt Lorraine signing a partnership deal with an arts training center for at-risk youth. The caption read, "Initiative, proposed by Lily Whitman." I sat still for a long time. Not out of pride, but because, for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be trusted. That night, I returned to the studio alone, carrying a new easel. I wanted to start my next project. A series titled, Places I Used to Disappear. Unlike before, I wasn't drawing to be seen. I was drawing to remember I had survived. After midnight, with the studio lights off, my phone buzzed. An unnamed message. "I know you hate me, but if one day you ever want to understand why I made those choices, I'll still be here." I didn't reply. Instead, I looked at the painting forming under my hands. A girl, standing in a dark room, holding a flashlight. The beam lit up a wall with scribbles someone had tried to erase. But traces still lingered. I didn't know if forgiveness would come. But I knew this much. From now on, I get to decide what stays, and what becomes just a lesson in the archive of memory. I pressed the brush down. The next piece had begun. And I was no longer a side character in my own story. Late that winter, I returned to my hometown, not to go back, but to inaugurate the first art therapy center I had proposed, and Aunt Lorraine now directed. The center was named New Line Studio, built inside a refurbished storage wing behind the Curtis Simons headquarters, once a cold concrete archive room. Now, its walls glowed with warm tones. Burnt orange, olive green, pale yellow. Each color chosen by the kids enrolled in our pilot class. Aunt Lorraine, still the heartbeat of everything, placed a hand on my shoulder as we hung the wooden sign by the entrance. "You did it," she said, her eyes shimmering with pride. "Not alone," I smiled. The opening wasn't flashy. No reporters. Just close family, a few Berkeley classmates volunteering, and the children in the first cohort. In the small crowd, I saw Brooke standing under a tree, holding her newborn daughter, Clara. When I walked over, she looked up and smiled. "She's obsessed with the smell of oil paint," she joked. "Every time I paint, she sleeps like a rock." I looked at Clara. So small, yet the catalyst of so many irreversible shifts. Brooke no longer dyed her hair the way Mom liked. No longer wore lipstick to match the executive wife look. She wore a worn beige sweater, her hair in a loose bun, and held her baby with steady, unshaking hands. "You're still painting?" I asked. "I think for the first time, I've actually started," she said softly, then paused. "Thank you, Lily. Not just for not giving up, but for not giving up on the ones who once gave up on you." I didn't answer. I just stood beside her, heart light as air. A few days after the opening, I received an unmarked parcel. The handwriting on the envelope made my chest tighten. Mom's. Inside was a short handwritten letter. "Lily, I don't know where to begin, so I won't try. I read the article from your school page. I saw your painting. Return? I may not deserve understanding, but you should know. Not a day passes that I don't think about what I did to you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but if one day you have space for conversation, I'll be here. Amelia." No apology, no justifications. But the pride was gone too. I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box, where I kept things I wasn't ready to explain. Maybe one day I'd write back. But not today. I didn't need to in order to feel peace. The next morning, I sat with Grandpa Curtis in the back courtyard of the center. He'd stepped down from his leadership role, now just an honorary advisor. But I knew, as long as he was breathing, he'd be watching every step I took. "Do you think I've stopped being angry at Mom?" I asked, stirring my coffee, eyes on the wind brushing the trees. "Anger's not the issue," he said. "The real question is, are you still letting it decide how you live?" I nodded. "Then I think I'm okay." He smiled, an expression warmer than any coming spring. That day, when the kids finished their first paintings in our pilot class, I walked around, stopping at the easel of a curly-haired girl named Mia. She had painted a dark room, but in the back was a small, open door, light streaming through a narrow crack. "Is that your room?" I asked. Mia nodded. "But," I added, "a door. You said paintings don't have to match real life." I smiled, and tears welled up without warning. "That's right, Mia, we get to redraw it." And maybe that's the greatest lesson I've ever learned. That life doesn't have to be perfect or tied up like a final chapter. Every person, every relationship, even the fractured parts of a family are just unfinished canvases, waiting to be continued, if we're brave enough to pick up the brush. Lily's story reminds us that not everyone is born into a family that knows how to love the right way, but everyone has the right to rewrite their own life. When truth is distorted and family becomes a tool of control, standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Forgiveness may not always be necessary, but healing can begin with setting boundaries. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't revenge. It's choosing to live on your own terms and turning pain into light. What do you think about Lily's journey and how she faced her family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about life and family relationships.